Thanks for the introduction, and thank you all for being here. Okay, so today I want to talk about mansplaining. So mansplaining is the main term here in the title. And I want to talk about mansplaining by giving an analysis in particular of mansplaining. And I want to give this analysis in terms of arrogance, understood as an epistemic bias, and in terms of injustice, or in particular a specific kind of epistemic injustice, okay? But before actually I tell you anything about this, I just wanted to tell you to give you some context on this. So this is basically a project that I'm working on with Daniela, as you were saying. And the point is that Daniela is actually the expert here. So basically she had the main idea for the paper. We were discussing this on chat, but she had the main idea of this paper. And then I basically proceeded to develop this idea. So I'm not the expert, but when she came up with this idea and we had a chat over it, I was actually super happy to write a paper on mansplaining, because I feel like that beyond the sort of like academic merit or value of talking about mansplaining in philosophy, and placing the sort of like concept of mansplaining in the contemporary philosophical discussion, which is good and legitimate. I think that writing a paper on mansplaining also has a distinctive, more sort of like practical value. And this is because mansplaining is a form of oppression. And in general, I think that clarifying concepts is a very useful thing, because concepts are something that we use every day, and something that sort of like guide our behavior, and help us navigate in our environment, in our everyday life. So when it comes to mansplaining, giving a definition of giving a philosophical analysis of mansplaining and understanding this concept well means that basically, I mean, at least the hope is that we will be able to resist or avoid, maybe in the future, the perpetuation of this form of oppression. So this is why I think that basically writing a paper on mansplaining is a good thing, not only philosophically, but in general. Okay, enough with context. So this is what I'm gonna do today. So this talk is divided into 3 parts. First, I'm gonna introduce the phenomenon. So I'm just gonna tell you a tiny bit about what mansplaining is, or better, I'm gonna give you some examples of mansplaining, because I don't really want to prime you with any sort of like dictionary definition of mansplaining, so that when you see the examples, and if you think that examples should be interpreted in different ways, and maybe we can have a chat about this in the Q&A. So first, I'm gonna introduce the phenomenon, then I'm gonna present what I take to be the standard view on mansplaining. And then I'm going to move on to objections to the standard view. And finally, I'm going to present our view and show that this is basically better, more successful than the standard view. All right. So I'm just going to start by giving you a couple of examples. The first one is a real example, something that really happened. And the second one is something that I came up with. Sorry. So, okay, so here's the first example. Astronaut Jessica Meyer tweeted a video of herself in a space equivalent zone 63,000 feet above the Earth's surface, observing how, in those extreme conditions, water spontaneously boiled. In response to her tweet, a sexist man, with a presumption of correcting her observation, explained to her the phenomenon in simple terms and with a condescending attitude. You will see this example again anyway. Here's a second example. So here we have Elohor and Akon, who are in a laboratory working on an experiment that they have designed together. Also, Akon is terribly sexist and believes he knows better than Elohor because he's a man. While running the experiment, Elohor asks Akon to confirm the exact temperature of incubation for an enzymatic reaction that to proceed in the desired way. In response, Akon condescendingly sets about explaining in simple terms facts about enzymatic reactions to Elohor. Okay, so I want to start from these 2 examples and notice the following thing. So, as I will say later, no one has yet given a philosophical analysis of the phenomenon of mansplaining, but a few people are talking about this phenomenon. all the reference that I will make, I will not make any reference, but whenever I talk about the standard view and people talking about mansplaining, I mostly refer to Kate Mann, the work of Kate Mann and Rebecca Solnit. Both these authors write Kate Mann is a philosopher, and she's written a book also on mansplaining, but she doesn't really, her book is not like a sort of like it doesn't give a technical analysis of the terms, just it introduces the phenomenon and tries to give a rough outline. And so what's common in the current discussion on mansplaining is that in order to understand this phenomenon, these people try to focus on the interlocutors, okay? And by focusing on the interlocutors, they notice the following two things, which I will take from now on to be the sort of like two pre-theoretical intuitions that we have when thinking about the phenomenon of mansplaining, and we try to explain it. The first one is that mansplaining involves an explanation that is in some sense redundant, is not necessary. It's an explanation that seems to exceed what is required in that conversation, that speak exchange that is happening in a particular case. And the second intuition is that it's something that has to do with the man, with the male speaker, and with his condescending tone, okay? So these are two, I will take this to be two pre-theoretical intuitions. And now I'm going to tell you basically how is the way in which people that are discussing this phenomenon in philosophy and outside of philosophy try to cash this intuition out. So in order to say what it means for an explanation to be redundant, they, for instance, mention the fact that the woman in the example usually is the woman is usually an expert on a particular topic, so she knows very well what she's talking about, what she's being explained. And also this is cashed out in terms of the explanation being unrequested. So usually the idea that the explanation is redundant is cashed out in terms of the fact that the woman is an expert, and so she needs to be told what she's being told. And by the fact that the explanation is unrequested, so the fact that the woman doesn't ask for an explanation, doesn't request an explanation. The explanation is unsolicited. On the other hand, to cash out the idea of this feeling of superiority of the man, this idea of the man speaking with a condescending tone, they cash this intuition out in terms of the man having sort of like speaking from a place of epistemic superiority and feeling epistemically superior to the woman they're talking to. Okay. And the second way in which they cash out this thing is by saying that this feeling of superiority that the man has is based on their being sexist, basically. And they're thinking, for instance, that women are not good at maths, and we're not good at physics, or this kind of things. Okay. So on the basis of this picture, I just want to present you what I would call the standard view that goes more or less as follows. It says that a man performs a speech act of mansplaining in an exchange with a woman, if and only if the man explains P to the woman, and the man explanation is unrequested. The woman is an expert on the topic of P, and the man falsely believes he is epistemically superior to the woman. And finally, that the man believes to be epistemically superior because he is sexist. Okay, so one thing to know about this is that, as I said before, I'm here providing an analysis that no one has actually ever given. So this is not the position of anyone. I take this to be still plausible and interesting to engage with, though, because I think that these four features here, these four conditions, are conditions that appear often when people, as I said, Kate Mann and Rebecca Solnit talk about mansplaining, and they make reference to at least these four, both of them. They also add maybe other things, but they diverge on these other conditions. So I basically take this to be a charitable interpretation of what they would probably say if they would have to, or if they wanted to give a philosophical analysis of mansplaining. All right. So now that we have our view, it's time to criticize it. These objections would not actually be many, which would actually be one long objection that is based on a counterexample. So I'm just going to present an example, a case that I take intuitively to be a case of mansplaining. And I will show basically that the standard view cannot account for this. Now, given that we will work on this example for a bit, I think it would be better for you to familiarize with the protagonist of this example. So say hi to Louis. He's our sexist mansplainer, and he's going to be with us for the next few slides, okay? Okay, so here's the example. Elena is a last year high school student struggling with her physics assignment. She definitely cannot get her mind around the fact that the speed of light is related in such a way with mass and energy in Einstein's special relativity. Her grandfather, Louis, is terribly sexist and believes that since she's a girl, he is epistemically superior to her on the topic, and unrequestedly starts explaining the problem to her, employing very basic terms as though meant for a third grader. Okay, so here, I mean, of course, I'm interested to know what you think about this, but I would take this as a quite intuitive case of mansplaining. So now I'm going to put here the standard view besides the example, and try to see whether the standard view can actually explain, can actually account for this example as a case of mansplaining. Okay, so condition one is fine. It seems like the example respects condition one. Condition one says that the man's explanation ought to be unrequested. And here we have explicitly that Louis starts explaining the problem unrequestedly. Condition three also seems to be respected. Condition three says that it must be the case that the man falsely believes that he is epistemically superior to the woman. And here again, we have the Louis is terribly sexist and believes that he is epistemically superior to her on the topic. Condition four is satisfied as well. We have the condition four is the condition about the sexist prejudice, and Louis is terribly sexist, as you could see from the picture. What's missing here is condition two. So we have the condition two says that the woman must be an expert on the topic. And here Elena is just a high school student. So she has some knowledge on the topic. I mean, she studied this probably. She has an assignment, so she has some knowledge of physics, but she's clearly not an expert. And she doesn't, I don't even think that she actually qualifies as knowing the topic either. So surely condition two is not satisfied. So if we want to be not very charitable, we could just like discount the standard view just based on this counter example. But actually, I would like to push this example a bit further, and imagine that at the end of the day, the defender of the standard view could actually say that, you know, the first two conditions are meant to cash out the intuition that the explanation is redundant, and both condition one and condition two do this. So if one of the two conditions is not respected, well, we could say that maybe the second one wasn't necessary, or maybe they're one also is not necessary, but two is. So they could maybe, you know, say something along this line to defend from this objection. So I'm going to push a bit further the objection and tweak the case a little bit. I'm going to call this, oh, sorry. Yeah. So yeah, this is a problem because, so I'm going to tweak the case a little bit, and I'm going to call this Grumpy Grandpa star. So in this other case, nothing changes. Everything stays the same as in the first case. The only thing that changes is that this time is Elena that goes to her grandfather and asks for his help. Okay. So here, clearly, the condition one also is not respected, but it doesn't really feel like much has changed here. So it doesn't really seem that whether this case is one of mansplaining depends really on whether this person is, whether Elena is actually asking for help or not. It doesn't really seem to be so, so fundamental. This may be a bit more problematic because this means that the two ways in which the defender of the standard view try to cash out the idea that the explanation is redundant are not good. But they could still say, you know, yeah, maybe that's not actually at the core of what mansplaining is. If you really want to understand mansplaining, the very important thing is that the fact that the person, that mansplainer is sexist, and he believes that he's epistemically superior, and this belief is false. And so I'm going to push the objection a little bit further with another tweak to the example. So consider now Grumpy Grandpa double star. Again, here the only thing that changes is that Louis is also a physics major, okay? So he knows about physics. So if this is the case, then condition 3 is also false, because it's not true that the man falsely believes that he's epistemically superior. So he actually is epistemically superior. And again, does it change much? I don't know. I'm going to try and read it again for you so that you can tell, but I think that this doesn't actually change much of the dynamic. This is still a case of mansplaining. So we have Elena, who is struggling with the physics assignment. She cannot get her mind around the fact that the speed of light is related in such a way with mass and energy. And her grandfather, a physics major, is terribly sexist and believes that since she's a girl, he's epistemically superior to her on the topic. And upon her request, starts explaining the problem to her, employing very basic terms as though meant for a third grader. So again, I feel that the fact that he's a physics major and he knows things about physics, he knows better than her, doesn't really change much in this example. So maybe, again, someone that wants to defend the standard view might have some problems here. Maybe they could start sort of like questioning their own view, hopefully. But they could still say, you know, what really matters about mansplaining is the fact that the guy is sexist, okay? And he's doing something bad because he's sexist. So the point is not much the belief, but where the belief is grounded, and it is grounded in sexism. So I want to push the example, the counter example a bit further and try to see if anything changes when our friend Louis is not sexist anymore. So try and see how it goes with this. So here we have that Louis rightly believes that since he's a physics major, since he's a physicist, yeah, he's a physics major, sorry, he's epistemically superior to his granddaughter on the topic. And then she asks him why the factor are thus related, and on the basis of this intellectual superiority, Louis responds by employing very basic terms as though meant for a third grader. Again, my intuition here is that this is still a case of mansplaining. This is still a case of mansplaining, and none of the conditions mentioned by the standard view are respected. So if this is correct, happy to talk about this, then the standard view is false. So here's the lesson we've learned from the discussion. The standard view is too narrow. So I haven't said anything about the sufficiency conditions. I only talk about the necessity conditions, partly because that was too messy and I didn't really want to do it, and partly because I think this is sufficient. So if a view cannot give us any necessary condition, then it's not a good view, basically. But this is bad in general. It's bad theoretically, but it's also bad in particular in the case of mansplaining, because if you have a concept of if your concept of mansplaining is too narrow, this means that there are out there people that are suffering. There are suffering from this from mansplaining. They're having this problem, and we are not able to recognize what's happening as a case of mansplaining. So this is actually here says an injustice escapes our sight. So this is actually pretty bad in the case of mansplaining. So we surely want to avoid this, even if it's maybe theoretically not the worst. Okay. Okay, so if you agree with me, now we can move to our view and see that this is better than a standard view. What I want, yeah, okay, sorry. So before I said that people that are talking about mansplaining, both in philosophy and outside of philosophy, I try to understand this concept by looking at the phenomenon and looking in particular at the interlocutors. They're trying to look at, whether the man is sexist, whether the woman actually asks for help, or actually asks a request an explanation, whether the man is has a feeling of superiority and these kind of things. So I think that the main idea behind our view is basically to shift the focus from the interlocutors to the actual conversation. Okay. So basically, what we would like to say, at least, is that mansplaining is fundamentally kind of like a conversational disrespect or something like that. So if we look at a conversation, again, we will start from the same intuition that I mentioned above, given that I said that these are pre-theoretical intuitions, and so that any view that want to give an account of mansplaining should, or at least ought to start from this. But what will change if we look at a conversation will be the way in which we cash out these intuitions. Okay. So the way in which, so I would think that the most straightforward way in which you can cash out the idea that an explanation in a case of mansplaining is redundant is simply by saying that the speaker explains too much. So this might seem a bit trivial, but I'm gonna show that it's absolutely not. And maybe a less straightforward way to cash out the second intuition, but I'll tell you a bit more about that too, is say that the man speaks with condescendence because he doesn't give enough credit to his interlocutor. So before I actually tell you a bit more about these two things, and before I actually tell you how I want to understand these two things, I would like to draw your attention on these two terms here, too much and enough. So in order to be able to, in order to say that someone is explaining too much, or that someone is not giving sufficient or enough credit to someone else, it means that there must be a standard. It means that there must be a sort of like a conversational standard that tells us when one is explaining too much, or when one is explaining too little, when one is giving too much credit or too little credit. And so in order to do this, we need to have a sort of like a normative ground. We sort of have to have a normative dimension on which to assess this conversation. And we're actually lucky because recently there's been an explosion of interest in the normativity of speech acts and speech exchange and all these sort of things. All the stuff of which I don't know much about, to be honest, but it's interesting anyway. I know enough to be able to say the next few things anyway. And but what I want to tell you is only that I'm gonna make reference to two specific names in the literature. And they basically don't need to know much more than that. So I'm basically going to say that in order to understand the first intuition, the way in which we have cashed out the first intuition, I'm going to make reference to Alessandra Tanesini, a notion of arrogance as an epistemic vice. And in order to understand the second way in which we've cashed out the second intuition, I'm going to make reference to Fricker's epistemic injustice. Okay, so on the basis of this, let me just go super quickly to the analysis of mansplaining that we propose. So basically, what we want to say is that mansplaining goes as follows: is analyzed as follows. So a man performs a speech act of mansplaining in an exchange with a woman. If and only if the man explains the P to the woman and the man's speech act is sourced in his haughty attitude, and the man's speech act constitutes testimonial injustice. So for those of you who are not native speaker like me, haughty means arrogant. Actually, Alessandra Tanesini makes a distinction between haughtiness and arrogance, but for the purposes of this talk, they're gonna be synonyms. So, okay, so to proceed, I have to tell you something about haughtiness and testimonial injustice. Okay, so this is what I'm gonna do now, very quickly, like incredibly quickly. Okay, so let's start with the haughty behavior. One behaves haughtily. Haughty behavior, I mean, like in an epistemic sense. Okay, not all arrogant behavior is defined this way. Alessandra Tanesini defines arrogance in this way because she's interested in a particular kind of epistemic arrogance. Okay, arrogance as an epistemic vice. So in this way, we can understand haughtiness as the behavior one who violates the answerability norm of conversation. Okay, what's the answerability norm of conversation? The answerability norm of conversation says that when making an assertion, a speaker makes a commitment to provide appropriate evidence in support of the assertion. So this means that when I say something, I thereby commit to provide evidence for what I've just said. Okay, so to giving reasons for what I've just said. Okay. Now, given that again here I've used the word appropriate, so you need to have the appropriate amount of evidence. This means that there are two ways in which you can violate this norm. The first way is by deficit of explanation. So the first way of violating this answerability norm is by basically explaining too little. Okay. And the other way of violating this norm is by excessive explanation. So basically, you violate this norm when you explain, you give too much evidence for in support of your assertion. And I want to argue that basically this is where this is what mansplaining does, basically. The other side, epistemic injustice. So epistemic injustice is a genus that can be distinguished into different species. Testimonial and hermeneutical injustice. I'm not going to be concerned with hermeneutical injustice. I'm just going to talk about testimonial injustice. This is everything we need to know for this talk. And testimonial injustice is, of course, when prejudice causes one to give a deflated level of credibility to their interlocutors. So, for instance, I'm Italian. Italians are known for being skillful liars. I don't know, maybe, probably. So imagine that I go to one and I say, oh, you know, I went to the mountains yesterday, it was nice, sun was shining, blah, blah, blah. And this person says, oh, did you really? Imagine that this person basically doesn't believe me or doesn't believe me as much as this person should, simply because this person is prejudiced against Italians. He thinks that Italians are liars. Maybe true, maybe not. But as a matter of fact, this person, for no good reason, doesn't really assign the right level of credibility to what I'm telling. So this is a form of injustice, because this person, without good reasons, is failing to hold my words to their deserved standard of credibility. And this injustice is epistemic. It's epistemic because it's harming me as a knower. It's harming me in my attempt to transmit a piece of information. I wanted to tell him that I had a nice time somewhere, and he fails to receive this information just because he thinks that Italians are skillful liars. Is he right? I don't know. Maybe. Okay. Okay. Now you know basically what epistemic injustice more or less is, testimonial injustice in particular, and you know more or less what's a haughty behavior and what it means for something to to count as a arrogant behavior, basically. So now that we know a little bit better what we take basically mansplaining to be, I just want to move on and consider the examples that we saw earlier and see if our view is actually capable of recognizing this as cases of mansplaining. Okay, so the first one is pretty easy. So we have that this poor person was just, she was just saying, to her Twitter friends, Twitter followers, she was just, look, people that are not used to being in space. When you're in space, water boils. Isn't that cool? And on the other hand, the man didn't really the content of the explanation, the content of the speech act of the man, it seems to be inappropriate to the content of what she's saying. She was just observing some phenomenon, and this person, with the presumption of correcting her, was explaining to her how the phenomenon worked, but she didn't really ask. So I think it's plausible to say that the explanation of this person was inappropriate to the content of her speech act, and so this person is arrogant. And this person was also unjust. Because he's explaining in simple terms. He's explaining as if he was talking to a child, a physical, like a phenomenon, a physical phenomenon to an astronaut and physicist. So clearly, this person didn't accord the right level of credibility to this person, and so he's unjust. This speech act, basically this person's explanation reveals to be arrogant and unjust. So this is a case of mansplaining according to our definition, according to our analysis. Second case here is even easier probably, because here we have a precise question. Elohor asks this guy to confirm the exact temperature of incubation of the enzymatic reaction. So this means that she wanted a number as an answer. And instead of a number, or other than a number, she got an explanation of how enzymatic reactions occur. So this means that, again, his answer was inappropriate to the question. The content of what he's saying was inappropriate to the content of her speech act. And so he is arrogant. And again, he's also unjust because he is explaining in simple terms, as if he was talking to a child, something to a peer scientist, a colleague, someone that has designed the experiment with him. So it's clear that she knows what she's talking about. She knows better than what he takes her to know, basically. So again, he doesn't accord her the right level of credibility. So he's unjust. And so this is a case of mansplaining. Finally, I'm not going to go through all the variations of the case. I took the Grumpy Grandpa triple star, which is the one that diverges more from the standard view. So that if I show you that we can account for this, then it's clear that we have a better predictive power than the standard view. And here is also pretty easy, the situation. Here we have the Elena asks a specific question. She knows something about physics. You know, she's studying for her assignment. She knows stuff, and she asks a specific question. She asks how mass and energy and speed of light are related in Einstein's special relativity, and in turn she gets as an answer based. Here I said a response employing very basic terms as meant for a third grader. So clearly, the content of the explanation doesn't match the content of the question, okay? It's in a sense inappropriate. He's explaining more than it is required. So he's arrogant, unfortunately. And then again, here we have that he's also unjust because he's talking to a high school student and he's talking as if he was referring to a third grader. And so he's unjust again. And so according to our view, we can actually say that this is a case of mansplaining, while the standard view cannot. And so to conclude, we can say basically that our view is better than the standard view. It is better because it's broader, because it is able to accommodate cases that the standard view fails to accommodate, such as the Grumpy Grandpa cases. And it's also clearer. I haven't said much about this, but maybe we can have a chat about this too. So I think that it's clearer because it identifies the phenomenon of mansplaining by appealing to some intersubjective norms. So some norms don't depend on anything that goes on in anyone's mind. So they're out there, they regulate our verbal interactions, and that's it. While the standard view, by referring to the feeling of superiority, by referring to the sexist prejudice, in real cases of mansplaining, you don't really know. In the examples, I made it explicit because in this way it was easier, but in everyday cases, you don't really know if the person is sexist. You don't really know if that person actually feels superior or not. So it's probably more difficult to, or in a sense, it's more easy for the perpetrator of the injustice or this mansplainers to just like back away and say, no, I'm not sexist. I love women. And I think they're clever when they're in the kitchen. And they can say, no, I didn't feel superior and blah, blah. But actually, if you refer to the conversation, if you refer to the norms of conversation, if you actually look at the content of their verbal exchange, and you can, in this way, you can show in a much clearer way where the problem is and how they've been behaving in a arrogant and unjust way. Okay, so that's it. Thanks a lot.